All right, so get ready because today we're diving into something really fascinating. It's called the self-esteem tree.
Ooh, I like that.
Yeah, right. It's this really cool concept by Teru Nakashima, and it's all about, how we build self-esteem, kind of like from the ground up, like how a tree grows.
I love that visual. It's so true. Just like a tree needs those strong roots and the solid trunk and those healthy branches to really thrive. Well, Nakashima's theory is that our self-esteem, it kind of works the same way. It needs these key elements to flourish.
Okay, so each part of the tree is like a different ingredient in this self-esteem recipe, and they all work together to, help us feel good about ourselves.
Exactly. And just like a tree, it all starts with the roots.
Oh, okay, so let's dig into those roots. What are we talking about here?
So the roots of the self-esteem tree are what Nakashima calls self-worth.
Self-worth.
Yeah, it's that deep down belief that you are valuable just because you exist.
Whoa, hold on. So you're saying, like, it's not because of what I do or what people think about me, it's just because I am.
It's like this unconditional self-acceptance. It's the fertile soil that allows those roots to really grow strong.
That makes a lot of sense. But how do you, like, cultivate that I'm worthy no matter what kind of feeling?
That's a great question. A lot of it goes back to our early childhood experiences. Just like a tree needs the right nourishment to grow, a supportive and loving environment in those early years can make a huge difference in how strong that sense of self-worth becomes.
Okay, so those early years really lay the groundwork. But what about people who maybe didn't have the best childhood? Does that mean they're stuck with weak roots forever?
Not at all. Think of it like tending a garden. Even if the soil wasn't perfect to begin with, there are things we can do to nourish it later on.
Oh, I like that analogy.
Right. Therapies like CBT can be super helpful for reframing negative thought patterns that might be holding us back. It's like gently untangling any knots in those roots and giving them space to breathe and grow.
So even if those early experiences weren't ideal, we can still cultivate that strong sense of self-worth.
Absolutely. And there are other approaches too, like NLP focuses on the connections between our thoughts, language, and behaviors, and it offers some really practical techniques for reshaping beliefs, including those about ourselves.
So it's not like we're just doomed by our past. We can actually take steps to build up those roots.
Exactly.
That's really reassuring.
It is. And this idea of inherent worth, it's not just some new age thing. It actually lines up with some classic psychological theories too.
Really? Like what?
Well, think about Maslow's hierarchy of needs. Self-esteem is right there at the base. It's a fundamental need that has to be met before we can move on to those higher levels of growth and fulfillment.
That's a good point. If you don't have that solid base of feeling worthy, it's probably pretty hard to build anything else on top of it.
Exactly.
Wow. It's amazing how all these different ideas connect.
It is, and we see that even with Freud, with his focus on the impact of childhood experiences, he'd likely agree that those early years have a big influence on our sense of worth.
Okay, so we've covered those essential roots, that sense of self-worth. What's the next part of this self-esteem tree?
Let's move up to the trunk, which represents self-acceptance.
Self-acceptance. I'm curious, what does it actually mean to accept yourself? Especially when, we all have things we want to change about ourselves.
That's a really important point, and that's what makes this concept so interesting. Self-acceptance isn't about striving for perfection. It's not about being flawless. It's actually about embracing both your strengths and your weaknesses.
Wait a minute. So you're saying I don't need to be perfect?
You got it. Those little quirks and imperfections, they're all part of what makes you unique. In fact, focusing on your goals and the future, that's Maslow's idea of self-actualization, can help shift away from that need to be perfect.
Okay, so it's about focusing on what I want to become, not obsessing over what I think is wrong. But how does this tie into the whole trunk idea?
Well, think about a tree trunk. It often has those knots and curves, maybe even some scars from past storms. But those imperfections don't weaken the tree. They actually add character and resilience. It's still standing tall.
Ah, so it's like those imperfections actually make us stronger, more resilient.
Exactly. It's about owning your whole self, flaws and all, without shame.
I love that idea. But it can't be easy to just like flip a switch and suddenly accept all those things we've been criticizing ourselves for, right?
You're right. It takes time and effort. Sometimes those negative self-perceptions, they run really deep. It's like they're buried in our unconscious. And in those cases, deeper exploration might be needed to uncover those roots and reframe them.
So how do we even begin to untangle those deep-seated beliefs and move towards self-acceptance?
Well, sometimes those really ingrained negative beliefs might need a more in-depth approach, like what you'd find in Jungian analysis. But even then, tools like CDT and NLP can still play a role in challenging and ultimately transforming those beliefs into something more empowering.
So it's about recognizing those imperfections as part of our story, not flaws to be ashamed of. And if those beliefs are really strong, there are ways to work through them and develop a more accepting view of ourselves.
You got it. It's a journey, for sure. And there are different paths you can take, but ultimately it's about embracing your authentic self-imperfections and all.
This is so cool. I'm loving how all these different schools of thought are coming together around this idea of self-acceptance.
It is fascinating, right?
It feels like such a crucial piece of the self-esteem puzzle.
Absolutely. And as we continue exploring the self-esteem tree, we'll see how each element builds on the one before it, creating this beautiful interconnected system.
Okay, I'm ready to climb higher. What's next on this self-esteem adventure?
Well, next we'll be reaching those branches which represent self-efficacy, that I can do it attitude.
Ooh, I already like the sound of that. But isn't self-doubt something we all struggle with sometimes? Is self-efficacy something you're just born with? Or can it be developed? Okay, so it's not about being born confident. It's more like you build it up over time?
Exactly. It's like a muscle. The more you use it, the stronger it gets. Every time you face a challenge and you come out on top of those branches, they grow a little bit stronger.
Okay, so it's not some innate thing you either have or you don't. It's something that can be developed. But what about people who've experienced like a lot of setbacks? Does that mean their branches are weaker?
That's where resilience comes in. Think of those branches bending in the wind. Maybe they even lose a few leaves during a storm, but they don't break. They actually become stronger and more flexible over time.
That's a good point. It's not about never failing. It's about learning to bounce back from those failures. But how do we actually build that resilience? I mean, it can't be easy to just pick yourself up and keep going when you're feeling discouraged.
You're absolutely right. It takes effort, but here's a tip that can really help focus on those small wins. Even tiny victories can make a big difference in boosting self-efficacy.
So it's like celebrating those little milestones along the way, even if they seem kind of insignificant.
Precisely. And there's a reason why that works. Behavioral psychology actually shows that positive reinforcement helps us repeat successful actions. So when you celebrate those wins, you're basically training your brain to focus on the positive, which makes you more likely to keep going even when things get tough.
That makes a lot of sense. It's like giving yourself a little pat on the back every time you achieve something.
Exactly.
This reminds me of the whole growth mindset concept. It's not about being perfect. It's about seeing challenges as opportunities to learn and improve. And I guess celebrating those small victories is a big part of that.
Absolutely. When you have a growth mindset, you're more likely to develop grit, which is basically that determination to keep pushing forward even when things get tough. And that grit is essential for strong self-efficacy.
So it's not just about, feeling good about yourself. It's about believing that you can actually achieve your goals and dreams. And that belief gets stronger the more you try, even if you stumble along the way.
Exactly. And it all ties back to that idea of self-actualization that we were talking about earlier, that desire to reach our full potential. Well, that belief in our capabilities, it's the fuel that keeps us moving forward.
Okay, so we've got the roots, the trunk, the branches. What comes next?
Next, we come to the leaves, which symbolize self-reliance.
Self-reliance. Okay. Are we talking about like trusting your own judgment, making decisions based on what you think is right, not just following what other people tell you?
Exactly. Self-reliance is all about tuning into that inner compass, that inner voice that knows what's truly best for you. It's about recognizing that you are the expert on your own life.
I like that. That sounds pretty liberating. But what about, when you're not sure what the right decision is? Is it okay to ask for advice from others, or does that go against the whole self-reliance thing?
It's not about shutting out everyone else's opinions. It's about understanding that ultimately you are the one who has to live with the consequences of your choices, your values, your experiences. All of that contributes to this inner wisdom that can guide you.
That makes sense. But what if you've made some bad choices in the past? Wouldn't that make it harder to trust yourself going forward?
Past mistakes can definitely shake our confidence. It's like those branches we were talking about. They might get a little bent out of shape, but they can still become stronger over time. It might take some work to rebuild that trust in yourself.
So how do you do that? How do you learn to quiet those doubts and start trusting your gut again?
Practices like meditation or journaling can be really helpful. They can help you tap into that inner wisdom. It's about creating space for quiet reflection, getting in touch with that deeper knowing within you.
So taking the time to really listen to yourself,
Exactly.
and I guess having a supportive network can help too, right? Like having people around you who encourage you to trust your instincts.
Absolutely. It's like having a strong root system for those leaves to draw nourishment from having supportive relationships, inspiring mentors. Those all contribute to building self-reliance.
This whole self-esteem tree analogy is really amazing. It really shows how interconnected all these different aspects of self-esteem are. Like they all work together to create this balanced and thriving system.
You're exactly right. And as we continue to climb this tree, you'll see even more of those connections.
I am ready for the next level. What's waiting for us further up this self-esteem tree? We've climbed all the way to the top of this self-esteem tree. It's been quite a journey from those roots, that sense of self-worth, and up through those leaves that trust in ourselves. What awaits us here at the very top?
Well, at the top of the tree, we find the fruit, and that represents self-usefulness.
Self-usefulness.
There's that feeling of contributing to something bigger than ourselves.
So it's not just about, feeling good about who we are on the inside, but it's also about, like, how we use that strength to make a positive impact on the world.
Exactly. It's like a natural progression, Think of a garden, you nurture the plant, it grows strong. And then eventually it bears fruit that nourishes others.
Oh, I like that analogy. So are we talking about, like volunteering, big acts of charity? What does self-usefulness look like in our everyday lives?
It doesn't have to be grand gestures. It's really about recognizing that we all have unique gifts and talents that we can share.
Okay, so you're saying it's not about having to become some kind of superhero to feel useful?
Not at all. It can be something as simple as offering a genuine compliment, or truly listening to a friend when they need to talk, or even just creating something beautiful that brings joy to others.
So even those small acts of kindness or sharing our creativity can contribute to that sense of self-usefulness.
Absolutely. And what's fascinating about those seemingly small acts? They often have a ripple effect.
A ripple effect. How so?
Well, imagine someone's having a bad day, right? And you offer them a smile or a kind word. That small gesture could actually shift their entire perspective, and then they might be inspired to do something kind for someone else.
Oh, I see. It's like that pay it forward idea. Those little acts of generosity and compassion can create this chain reaction of positivity.
Exactly. And when we see ourselves as part of that chain, as contributors to something larger than ourselves, it naturally boosts our own self-esteem.
Okay, that makes sense. So we're talking about, using our unique strengths to contribute. But what about people who feel like they haven't found their purpose yet? Or those special gifts they're meant to share with the world?
Well, sometimes those gifts are hidden in plain sight. It just takes a little bit of self-discovery to uncover them.
So how do you go about doing that, unearthing those hidden talents?
A good place to start is to pay attention to what brings you joy. What are those activities that make you lose track of time? What do you find yourself naturally drawn to?
Oh, so it's about looking for those clues within ourselves, those things that energize and excite us. But what if those passions don't seem like they have an obvious way to benefit others?
Remember, self-usefulness comes in many forms. It doesn't have to be this grand, world-changing mission. Sometimes those everyday acts of kindness and support, or simply sharing our creativity, those are all valuable contributions.
This self-esteem tree concept is so inspiring. It's like we've been given this roadmap for not only, feeling good about ourselves, but also for using those strengths to make a positive difference in the world.
It is a beautiful model for personal growth. And what's even more remarkable is how it highlights the interconnectedness of our well-being with the well-being of others,
I have to say this has been an incredibly insightful deep dive. I feel like I have this whole new perspective on self-esteem. And I'm definitely feeling motivated to nurture my own tree and see what kind of fruit it bears.
That's wonderful to hear. And remember, just like a real tree, our self-esteem needs ongoing care and attention to truly thrive. So keep nurturing those roots, strengthening that trunk, reaching for those branches, trusting those leaves, embracing those flowers, and sharing those fruits with the world.
Well, that brings our deep dive to an end for today. But the exploration doesn't have to stop here. We encourage you to keep digging deeper into this fascinating world of self-esteem. And until next time, keep diving deep into the world of knowledge.